Around 5:30 p.m. on Sunday, Emily came in through the front door, dropped her purse and keys onto the nightstand, and walked down the hall toward the master bedroom. I wasn't sure if she noticed me sitting in the office, but honestly, it didn't matter. For years now, I'd become almost invisible to her. As I approached her, I picked up her keys, took my spare ones back, and, after a quick search through her purse, grabbed her cell phone and wallet. I emptied the cash and credit cards from my wallet into my pocket, just as a precaution, and also took her driver's license before returning to my place in the office. 15 minutes later, Emily stepped out of the hall, looking put together, and glanced my way as she slipped her purse over her shoulder and picked up her keys. "I'm meeting some girls from work. Don't wait up," she said casually. "You're not going out with any girls from work," I replied, my tone firm. "Mark, you should know by now that you don't control me." "I'll do as I please," she shot back. "I'm not saying you can't hang out with your coworkers. I'm saying that's not what you're doing tonight. You're going to see your boyfriend, so cut the lies," I said. Emily hesitated, standing silent for a moment, then boldly walked right into the office and faced me directly. "All right, Mark," she started. "I'd prefer to handle this differently, but let's be honest. We end things here. You have two options. Either salvage what's left of this marriage by giving me the freedom I want, or face divorce and be cut out of my life. What's it going to be?" "Option number 3, I replied, smirking. "Don't be ridiculous. There's no option number 3. Either accept that I have a lover now, a real man, or prepare yourself for what comes next," Emily warned. I stood, walked over to her, and pushed her back against the wall, removing her engagement and wedding rings from her left hand. I leaned in close, glaring into her eyes as I whispered, "Here's your third option. This is my front door. Once you walk through it, that's it. You leave empty-handed and never come back. You won't get another cent of my money. You'll lose your husband, your daughter, your house, your money, your car, and your job." "You're delusional, Mark," she muttered, sounding a bit shaken. "My lawyer will tear you apart. Tomorrow I'll send divorce papers to your workplace. And if you try to harm me, you'll end up hurting yourself worse than me." I pulled her away from the wall and led her toward the front door. She stumbled in her heels, trying to keep her footing while shouting incoherently. Emily had never seen this side of me, and I could tell she was caught off guard, her usual composure crumbling. When we reached the front yard, I closed the door behind her and locked it. The lock already changed earlier that day. After she left, I made the first of 2 calls. I dialed my 19-year-old daughter, who was away at college. "Hey, it's Dad. Things with your mom have come to a head. It looks like she's moving in with her boyfriend, and I wanted to talk to you about it. Just so you know, I've recorded our last conversation and a lot of past arguments, so if she tries to twist things or blame me, you'll know the truth. She's been cheating. I don't know how often, but she's chosen this guy over us. I'll tell you more when we talk, but this boyfriend seems sketchy, so just be cautious around her." I asked Sophie to come home for the weekend, hoping we could talk it through and that she'd be open to hearing some of the recordings. Thankfully, she agreed to come home on Friday. With that settled, I made my second call to Helen, our neighbor down the street. "Helen, it's Mark," I said. "If your offer still stands, I'd like to accept. Could you stop by in about an hour?" I kept the details short. I trusted Helen and felt like she needed to know what was happening. Emily and I had met young, married early, and soon had Sophie. Things were good at first, but over time, Emily's attitude shifted. She became moody, manipulative, and controlling. I tried everything I could to keep the peace and make her happy, but it only seemed to make things worse. Looking back now, I realize I played a role in my own misery by constantly trying to please her. Now that we're both in our 40s, our lives have unraveled. It wasn't long ago that I found out about Emily's affair with a guy named Chris, who has a pretty rough past. Realizing our marriage was over brought a strange sense of relief, and I started thinking ahead. I'd heard stories of husbands taking half the money, but that wasn't my plan. I took every cent I could find, including all the cash in the house. I changed the locks and prepared to provoke Emily as much as possible. I knew her reactions well enough to anticipate her moves. She's dangerous in her own way, but this time, she'd be her own worst enemy. Truthfully, my plan started long before I knew about her affair. For years, I'd been discreetly recording our fights. Emily thought the device I carried was just an MP3 player, but I was building a library of her outbursts to capture her true behavior. I knew people wouldn't believe me without proof, as she only mistreated me behind closed doors. I wanted Sophie, and anyone else who needed to know, to see Emily's real character. On the Monday following our explosive Sunday argument, I decided to have a bit of fun at work. In the break room, I put up a large banner reading "Happy Divorce" and brought in cake and ice cream to set the scene. I eagerly awaited the process server's arrival, and soon enough, a cheerful, pleasantly plump woman entered, carrying the divorce papers. Cameras flashed as my coworkers and I celebrated this unique milestone together. I even posed for a picture while receiving the papers, planting a light-hearted kiss on her cheek as she donned a festive hat. In another photo, I fed her a slice of cake, and we both grinned for the camera. After the festivities wrapped up, I emailed the photos to Emily, adding a few more for good measure. Among them were pictures of me and Helen, my new roommate, lounging in bed with the sheets pulled up around us, both smiling wide. I hoped Emily would notice her wedding rings on Helen's left hand, resting on my chest. An hour later, my phone buzzed with an angry call. "You scoundrel! My lawyer will tear you apart after seeing these photos." What a reckless move. Hardly, Emily. There's nothing inappropriate in those images. No nudity, just a few harmless pranks between neighbors, all in good fun. I replied calmly. "We'll see about that, Mark. I'll be stopping by the house tonight to pick up some things. It might be best if you're not there. If I'm not home, you're not getting inside. All the locks have been changed. If you want anything, come well before 6:45. Helen and I have plans at 7 o'clock, and I don't want to be late." Last night was the closest I've felt to true contentment in years, and tonight promises to be even better. I ended the call and let her 5 follow-up attempts go straight to voicemail. Though I wasn't picking up her calls, I listened to every message. I knew Emily well enough to believe she'd let something slip in her angry rants. And sure enough, over the next few weeks, her messages revealed more than she realized. At 4:30 that afternoon, I drove to Emily's workplace parking lot, hoping to beat the evening rush. I confirmed that there were no security cameras around, as I wanted what I was about to do to be quick and discreet. Pulling up beside her car, I circled it with a pair of wire cutters and snipped the valve stems on all 4 of her tires. I knew it would leave her fuming, and fixing it in time to get home by 6:45 would be impossible. But at 6:35, she showed up anyway, clearly flustered, looking like she'd been out with someone else. I figured she was eager to retrieve whatever personal items she'd stashed at her boyfriend's, including a few clothing receipts I'd seen that she'd never brought home. As she started pounding on my front door and shouting, I slipped out through the back and headed over to Helen's place, leaving her alone in her frustration. Later that evening, I returned to find the front window shattered, with streaks of blood around the broken glass. I reviewed the security footage, then promptly called the police. The video showed Emily, tire iron in hand, smashing the window and yelling threats at me. As she tried to reach through, she sliced her arm badly, cursing and shouting all the while. Fortunately, the new lock I'd installed required a key on both sides, so she couldn't get inside. After the incident, an officer arrived to help me file a restraining order. The following morning, Emily received the official paperwork barring her from coming within 500 feet of me or the house. Her reaction was explosive, to say the least. "What in the world are you doing, you idiot?" she screamed in her next call, unleashing a fresh string of threats. I made sure to record every word. A few hours later, she called again, her tone a bit calmer, to tell me she'd be sending her friend Rachel to pick up some of her belongings that evening. What could she be so eager to retrieve? I couldn't help but wonder. I agreed to meet Rachel at 5:30 p.m. on Tuesday. To prepare, I left work early to set up a discreet video camera in my bedroom, with a live monitor in the office. Rachel arrived on time, and I greeted her warmly. As she packed some clothes into a couple of large black trash bags, I sat on the bed, casually watching. She seemed nervous and after a while, asked if I could get her a glass of water from the kitchen. I nodded and left, glancing at the monitor as I walked away. I caught sight of her reaching into the closet, pulling out a shoebox, and adding it to one of her bags. Once I returned with the water, she resumed her packing, seemingly oblivious to my watchful eye. After finishing, she told me she'd gotten everything and asked me to help carry one of the bags. Noticing that the bag she was holding looked heavier, I offered to take it instead, but she insisted she was fine, waving me off while fidgeting with her grip. As she edged toward the door with her bag, I raised an eyebrow and asked, "Is there something in that bag I should know about?" I held Rachel's wrist firmly and pulled open the package, ignoring her stammered insistence that it just contained clothes and other things Emily needed. But the truth quickly unraveled. A familiar smell wafted up, the distinct scent of aged cash. I confronted her, asking why a box of worn $50 and $100 bills was hidden among Emily's supposed clothes. Accusing her of attempted theft, I stood up and steered her down the hall toward the exit. She tried to explain, insisting the money belonged to Emily and that she was just retrieving it on Emily's behalf, with no intent to steal. I pointed out that she'd shown up asking for clothes but was now attempting to leave with a box full of money, which, in my book, looked a lot like theft. I told her I'd have no problem calling the police and making sure she was charged with robbery. Her face turned pale as she pleaded, asking me not to get the authorities involved, mentioning her kids and husband. I sat her down on the couch and told her how disappointed I was, making it clear she'd never be welcome in my house again. Though she cried and tried to defend herself, I laid out her one chance to redeem herself. "You'll leave here and tell Emily that I caught you trying to steal. Then you'll keep me updated on everything Emily says or does, especially anything about our divorce or her relationship with Chris. And let me be perfectly clear, if you so much as hint to Emily about our arrangement." I told her she'd have to help Emily find her way out of this mess with her new boyfriend. Then I added, as she continued trembling in silence, that I had video evidence of the entire incident and could report her at any time if she didn't cooperate. Hesitantly, Rachel agreed to act as my informant. After she left, I took the shoebox of cash and headed over to Helen's house down the block. She agreed to hold on to it until I found a more secure place to keep it, far out of Emily's reach. I was pretty sure I'd pieced together the origin of the money. Emily's Aunt June, notoriously frugal, had passed away a few months ago and left Emily as her sole heir. I knew Aunt June had left her a modest little cabin out in the countryside, but there had been no mention of cash in her will. I figured Emily must have stumbled upon this stash of bills when she went to inspect the property after the reading. A short while later, Emily called, her voice laced with fury. I recorded the call discreetly. "That money is mine, Mark. I want my damn money," she screamed. "Emily, I have no idea what you're talking about. All I know is I caught Rachel trying to swipe some cash from my nightstand. It's mine. You know what I mean, the money in that shoebox. It's from Aunt June," she shouted. I responded calmly, "Maybe Rachel found some cash in a shoebox, but if so, she probably pocketed it herself. I don't have it. And if you were keeping secret cash in our house, I didn't see it reported on our taxes last year. I reviewed our returns, Emily. Feel free to call the police and we can involve the IRS too. They'd be very interested in unreported income." She let out an angry shriek before hanging up. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd pushed her to the edge, and I was certain she wouldn't back down easily. Given the restraining order preventing her from coming around the house, I figured she might try something else. Maybe go after my car, especially since I damaged hers. To prepare, I had a dashboard camera installed, but I knew that wouldn't be enough to capture everything. I wanted clear evidence if she decided to retaliate. On Wednesday morning, I parked in front of my garage and set up an exterior camera, hidden just enough to capture the area around the car. During my lunch break, I logged onto my laptop and watched the live feed. Sure enough, Emily pulled up behind my car, climbed out, and started swinging a hammer at it, smashing windows and denting the body. She broke the windshield while yelling insults, and a chill ran down my spine watching her fury. I called 911, and by the time she left the driveway, a police car was waiting for her. The video of her vandalizing my Toyota was all the proof they needed. They arrested her on the spot, and to top it off, she resisted arrest, adding another charge. As she was taken away, her furious eyes met mine, but I stayed silent. Later that day, Emily's divorce lawyer reached out, informing me of an emergency court hearing set for Thursday at 10 a.m. to discuss her access to the funds in our joint accounts. I arrived at 9:50, wondering if she had managed to post bail. She entered the courtroom with her attorney, wearing a smug expression. "Your Honor," her lawyer began, "my client was denied access to the joint accounts after filing for divorce. Her husband emptied the accounts without her consent. We're requesting a 50-50 division of those funds." The judge turned to me. "Mr. Peterson, do you have anything to add?" "Yes, Your Honor," I replied, standing. "My wife, who has been having an affair, has been quietly withdrawing her own share from the joint accounts for months. The funds I withdrew were only fair compensation, as I've been covering the rent and household expenses. She walked out on our marriage to be with another man." Emily jumped up, objecting. "That's completely false. He emptied our accounts, leaving me with absolutely nothing." Her lawyer intervened, gently pulling her back to her seat for a whispered discussion. Meanwhile, I handed over documents to the judge. "Your Honor, here are last year's bank statements. I've highlighted key amounts, specifically deposits of Emily's salary up until several months ago, along with some bonuses. Then, about 6 months ago, her deposits stopped entirely. I also have a recorded call with her Human Resources Department confirming she redirected her paychecks into her own account. The total diverted amount from our joint account is substantial. It is evident that my wife, who has been unfaithful, possesses more than enough resources that came from our marriage." The judge examined the statements carefully before looking up at Emily. "Miss Peterson, do you have a response?" Her lawyer rose cautiously and said, "Your Honor, even if my client has personal funds, Mr. Peterson still has a duty to provide her with an equitable share." "Counselor, deceit does not sit well in my court," the judge replied sternly. "Miss Peterson claimed to be financially destitute, yet evidence shows she was well supported by marital assets, deceiving both her husband and this court. Since Mr. Peterson is handling expenses from his own funds, there's no basis for any changes to the financial arrangements at this time. We'll address property division at the final decree." Case dismissed. As I exited, Emily stormed up to me in the hallway, spitting out threats. I calmly took out my phone and began recording. "Emily, you're violating the restraining order. If you don't leave, I'll call the police. How was jail, by the way? Are you ready for a second stay? You do have criminal charges pending, after all." She looked ready to lash out but held back, her face red with frustration as I walked away. That evening, still feeling unsettled, I went to a different bar where I'd previously met a man named Zeke. Luckily, he was there, nursing a drink. I greeted him, asking if he remembered me, to which he replied, "Names don't matter." Zeke mentioned he still drove that old, beat-up car. He spoke bitterly about how his wife had taken their good car when she ran off with her new boyfriend, leaving him stuck with a car that had no air conditioning. I asked about his insurance and hinted that I might have an idea for how he could get a better car. He leaned in, interested. "Picture this," I said. "You're driving down 38th Street, and suddenly a gray cat darts in front of you. Instinctively, you slam the brakes, and the lady behind you might rear-end your car. Now, if she's going faster than 15 miles per hour, there's a good chance your car will be totaled. But if you're sitting back with your seatbelt on, you should be okay. Your insurance would cover the damage, and you could end up with a car that actually has air conditioning. But what if the lady gets hurt? I don't want to harm anyone," Zeke replied with some hesitation. "Rest assured," I said. "The woman is an unfaithful spouse and she'll be alone. Just follow my instructions. What do you think?" "Oh man, that sounds good. I can't stand cheaters, and I definitely need to replace this junk. Then here's the plan. Park at the corner of 38th and Ling around 5 p.m. tomorrow. Watch for a blue Miata pulling out of the lot and heading your way. Get in front of her, Drive for a block or two until she's close, and then you'll spot a cat darting across the road. Hit the brakes, then just sit tight and call for help. Mention a possible neck injury. And remember, we never met. Zeke grinned. Man, you're as cold as the air in that new car. The next day, Friday, I left work early to meet my daughter, Sophie, at home. She'd been at school but was coming back for the weekend, and I wanted to discuss the divorce situation with her. That Sunday night, I sat down with Sophie and played a recorded conversation I'd had with Emily about door number 3, a thinly veiled threat she had directed my way. Sophie listened, wide-eyed, as she heard her mother's cold, calculating voice. I then played a few more recordings from the past couple of years, showing her a side of Emily she'd never seen before. Dad, what do you know about the guy Mom's seeing now? I know he's no good, and I want you to steer clear of him, Sophie. If you absolutely have to meet your mom, make sure it's in a public place. I can't say what lengths he'd go to in order to get to me, but it's better to be safe. And keep something with you to protect yourself if there's ever any sign he's around. She nodded, looking down, then asked, Dad, I thought you and Mom just had some issues, but what went so wrong between you two? I had anticipated this question, and I offered her a summarized version of what I believed went wrong. I explained that her mom and I had fundamentally different views on marriage. After taking some time to think it through, I told Sophie that, in my experience, power could be divided in 4 main ways in a relationship. Sometimes, neither person takes the lead, and everything just drifts along, like a ship without a rudder. Other times, both partners try to take control, which leads to constant fighting or, at best, a division of responsibilities. Some couples manage to share control equally, which was what I hoped for. But things didn't turn out the way I'd envisioned. Another relationship scenario occurs when the man takes on full control. While that might work in certain situations, it's generally considered outdated and often viewed as oppressive. Yet, if a husband is truly dedicated, it can resemble a fairy tale, with the wife enjoying a peaceful life without tough decisions on her shoulders. It can also look like your maternal grandparents' marriage. Your grandmother was submissive, and your grandfather was in charge, sometimes harshly. Growing up with that, your mother might have come to expect the same from our relationship. So, when I tried to share responsibilities equally, she misinterpreted it as weakness. Over time, she grew increasingly disrespectful, despite my efforts to make things work. That brings us to the last scenario, a relationship where the wife dominates. This, it seems, was what your mother chose. When I did not meet her standards, she became harsh. She'd dictate every detail of family projects and even micromanage how I held a hammer, making home feel less like a sanctuary and more like a battleground. In a marriage where the wife takes control, the balance feels unnatural. I do not understand how it can work. While the husband may stay loving, the wife loses respect as she tightens her grip. In our case, I started to resist, and Emily saw it as irresponsibility or rebellion. I doubt I'll ever regain her respect. Maybe this divorce is my last chance to stand my ground. I told Sophie she would understand my decisions as she came to appreciate how challenging it was to push back against her mother's approach to life. I encouraged her, when she faced important choices in relationships, to remember the importance of respect and balance. Having a partner who understands these things would help her avoid the mistakes her mother and I had made. Sophie promised to think about it. Just then, the phone rang. Mr. Peterson, this is Memorial Hospital. Your wife was in a car accident. She's stable and not seriously injured, but she'll be here overnight. Sophie and I drove to the hospital, and I let her enter her mother's room first. She didn't stay long, and afterward, I asked to speak with Emily alone. Sophie's grim look told me she had likely been candid with her mother. Wow, Emily, you look rough, I said with a small grin. What a week, huh? First, you lose your marriage, husband, and home. Then, you get slapped with a restraining order, arrested on felony charges, lose some of your expected funds, and now your car is totaled, and here you are with a broken wrist and bruises from the airbag. Seems like this divorce is shaping up better for me. Get lost, she hissed. Oh, Emily, where's that old wit? Has he come to visit yet? Don't worry. He's probably busy with one of his other girlfriends. Her face turned pale. So, you didn't know about the others when you started all this, did you? Tough lesson to learn now. Who knows? Maybe he'll expect you to serve one of them next. I never thought of you as a pushover, but it might be a good skill to develop, especially if prison's on the horizon. I'm not going to jail. My lawyer will get these bogus charges thrown out. Think so? You wrecked my car, endangered my health, and still think you'll walk? I spoke with the district attorney, and he seems eager to set an example. He's got the photos and an election coming up. He told me he's aiming to send a message by seeking the maximum penalty. She sat there, silent, watching me closely. By the way, decided which car insurance company to call? I asked. Insurance? What are you talking about? We've always had the same coverage. Hold on. So you didn't get a new insurance policy this week? Once you filed for divorce, I removed your car from my policy. You insisted on having only your name on that Miata. Remember? If you skipped insurance, you're in for a headache. Fines, impound fees, and higher payments for 3 years. You might be paying for that totaled Miata long after it's scrapped. And with a felony conviction on the horizon, you'll be jobless too. Plus, you'll have to pay the medical bills for the guy you hit, and his insurance will come after you for damages. Damn it, she muttered under her breath. But at least you have your own medical insurance, right? I'm still on yours, she replied almost defiantly. No, I corrected, shaking my head. I took you off my health insurance on Monday. You didn't handle that either? Well, baby, you're in big trouble. The ambulance ride, emergency room visit, x-rays, doctor's fees, cast for your arm, hospital stay, and follow-up care. All of that is going to cost you thousands and thousands of dollars. I paused, then added, speaking of medicine, I was just thinking about that time you got sick a couple of years ago. Remember? I took an entire week off to take care of you. I held your head while you threw up, cleaned up every mess, called the doctor, and went to the pharmacy for your meds. And how did you repay me? As soon as you felt better, you went right back to insulting me. I wonder if Chris will take such good care of you the next time you're sick. Well, since you're so interested in him, she said, regaining some defiance, maybe I'll give him a call. Have a nice life. As I left the room, I could see Emily was crying, but I was far past caring. For a while, life settled into a routine. I kept in touch with Rachel from time to time, but her worry about Chris's influence over Emily grew, and eventually, she distanced herself. Then, one evening, as I approached my front door, I was blindsided by an attack on my own lawn. Although I was generally on guard, I didn't see this one coming. A man in a ski mask ambushed me. He knocked the wind out of me, twisted my arm, and demanded that I hand over some box of money and persuade the district attorney to drop the charges. I felt powerless but remembered I still held my car remote. I pressed the panic button, and my car alarm blared. Furious, the man struck me once more before fleeing as neighbors' porch lights flicked on and people began looking out. I shouted for someone to call emergency services, and within minutes, a police officer arrived. I wasn't injured enough to need an ambulance, and the attacker was already gone. None of the neighbors had managed to see his face, so he escaped without consequence. The next day, I told my daughter about the incident. Her response shocked me even more. Dad, I didn't want to worry you, but Chris confronted me too. Mom called me wanting to talk, so I agreed but insisted on meeting somewhere neutral. She still asked me to pick her up, but when I got there, she led me into their apartment and sat me on the couch. That's when Chris appeared. He told me that, since Mom was struggling to handle her injuries, I'd have to pick up the slack. He said Mom owed him and I would have to pay it back. I looked at Mom, hoping she'd stand up for me, but she just stared at the floor. Chris even told her to make me agree. She looked at me with these pleading eyes and whispered, "Please, baby, just do this. It won't be that bad. I need you to do this for me." Then Chris got close, grabbed my wrist, and tried to pull me up, saying we were going to the bedroom. I reached into my purse, pulled out my pepper spray, and blasted him in the face. He screamed, clutching his face, while I grabbed my purse and tried to pull Mom out the door, but she resisted and ran back to him in the bathroom. I yelled for her to come with me, but she chose to stay with him. I can't believe my own mother tried to set me up with that monster. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive her. I was seething, the protective father in me boiling over. My mind flashed to my Magnum in the bedroom, and for a moment, I nearly went for it. But Sophie reassured me, saying she was okay and that I needed to think about the future. I made her promise to avoid walking alone until the trial was over and to always have some form of protection. She agreed to only date people she trusted and to never go anywhere alone. As for Chris, he didn't realize the kind of conversation I was about to have with the district attorney. I brought up the recording of my daughter's account, reminding the district attorney of Chris's assault on me. The attorney asked if I'd consider leniency toward Emily. "No way," I said firmly. "I want the maximum penalty. Emily's under this man's toxic influence, and separating them is the only way she'll ever have a chance. A prison sentence might be the only way to get through to her." The district attorney nodded, and we prepared for the trial. I kept a close eye on my surroundings, especially while leaving and returning home. My house sits along a long stretch of isolated ranch road, with one turnoff in the next 15 miles. I kept my Magnum with me, prepared for anything. A few days before the trial, I noticed a pickup truck trailing me on my way home. As it drew closer, chills ran down my spine. Within minutes, it was tailgating me at 55 miles per hour, just a few feet from my rear bumper. I immediately dialed emergency and activated my phone's voice recorder, accelerating to 70 miles per hour, but the truck stayed right behind me. I frantically asked the emergency operator to get in touch with the detective handling my assault case. The truck stayed right on my tail for another 5 miles while I narrated what was going on. With the pistol resting next to me, I prepared myself for whatever might happen next. As I neared a bridge over a small creek, I had a strong feeling the driver was planning to force me off the road. The truck accelerated as we got closer to the bridge, about 100 yards away, and I knew right then that was their intention. For just a moment, I caught a glimpse of Emily's face in the passenger seat as they pulled up beside me. I slammed on the brakes, sending the car into a skid, but I managed to keep control. The truck came to a stop ahead of me, and my quick reflexes prevented any collision. My car came to a stop by the roadside, its back end sliding down the slope toward the creek. I quickly got out, grabbed my weapon, phone, and recorder, and started making my way down the steep gravel slope under the bridge. As I did, I noticed the truck's brake lights flash on. Moving carefully in the darkness, I slowly made my way beneath the bridge, cautious of any potential dangers, like a rattlesnake. But my biggest concern was what else might be lurking. Panting from the effort, I searched for a spot where I could hide, finally pausing to tilt the Magnum. I waited there, tense, but nothing happened for what felt like an eternity. I lost contact with emergency services, and when I tried to redial in the dark, I had no luck due to the poor signal. The reception was terrible. I was stuck, unsure whether help was on its way. At least the ominous sound of the truck overhead had faded. I decided to stay put, preparing to spend the night there if necessary. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, but it was probably only 5 or 10 minutes before I heard a siren in the distance, coming from the same direction as me. Realizing it was far behind, I started making my way up the hill, leaving the Magnum behind under the bridge. As I reached the road, I raised my hands, calling out to the police not to shoot. There were 2 cars blocking both lanes across the road, and I could hear sirens coming from the other side. I saw the pickup truck heading back toward the bridge. I stumbled and fell into the mud. My view was limited, but I heard the truck screech to a halt, followed by the officers ordering the driver out and onto the ground. Other police cars arrived shortly after, stopping behind the truck. Soon, Emily and Chris were in custody, charged with attempted manslaughter. Although I was deeply shaken, I made my way home, showered, and tried to sleep, but it was impossible. When your spouse faces multiple felonies, divorce doesn't seem that complicated. The judge showed sympathy, and Emily and her lawyer didn't put up much of a fight, eager to minimize her prison time. She offered to give up almost everything in the divorce in exchange for a lighter sentence. At the sentencing hearing, I testified about Emily's past goodness before she fell under Chris's influence. I told the court I could eventually forgive her for trying to take my life, leaving out the likely infidelity and years of torment. I couldn't read her expression in court, and I didn't speak to her directly. In the end, Chris was given a lengthy prison sentence. Hopefully, he's sharing a cell with a big guy named Bubba, who's got his eye on him. The judge showed some leniency toward Emily, but she won't be eligible for parole for at least 3 years. It's been about 4 years since Emily went to prison. The district attorney's office let me know that she was granted parole about a year ago. I kept expecting to hear from her, though I knew she wasn't in touch with Sophie. Revenge seemed like the right move, but it didn't bring the closure I thought it would. I found myself caught up in everything that had happened, none of it what I'd expected. I finally called my ex-wife. "Emily, it's Mark. I have something of yours, and I want to give it back." I called the rehab center where she was staying. There was a long pause before anyone picked up. "Emily, I want to return a shoebox to you. Can you hear me? Can we meet so I can give it to you?" I figured she might hang up, but finally she answered. "Where? When? I don't care." We agreed to meet somewhere neutral, like a restaurant, or she could come to my house. I suggested Sunday. "Are you free Sunday?" After a brief silence, she responded, "I'll be there Sunday at 2 p.m. The phone rang. "How do you prepare to face your ex-wife, the mother of your child, the woman who tried to kill you, and a convicted felon?" I decided to make lemonade and cookies. When Emily arrived, neither of us made any attempt to shake hands or hug. We exchanged greetings, and I motioned for her to come into the office. Her hair was much shorter than I remembered, and her eyes were cold. She wasn't wearing much makeup, if any. At 50, she looked like she was 65. There were drinks, cookies, and the shoebox on the coffee table. She sat across from me on the sofa. I offered her a soft drink, but she declined. Did she think I was trying to poison her? "Well, if you don't want lemonade and cookies, then I guess all that's left is the shoebox and whatever else we need to say to each other." "What's the catch, Mark? What do you want in return? Is there anything left?" she asked, her voice full of suspicion. "There's no catch, Emily. Everything's there except for a few $1,000s, which I contributed, matching that amount from my own funds, and gave to Sophie as a down payment for her house when she got married. If you want, she can start paying you back whenever it's convenient for you." I simply gave her my portion. I could see from the look on Emily's face that she hadn't known Sophie was married. "Sophie's been married for 2 years now, and you're already a grandmother." I could feel the tension in her eyes as she processed this new information, her emotions clearly at war. The little girl's name is Shannon Emily Evans. Shannon is named after her other grandmother. Despite her best efforts to hold it together, Emily's eyes welled up with tears. "Emily, I know it's been a while since you've spoken to Sophie. There has to be a way for you to reconnect. If you want, I can help with that." Emily nodded, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. I reached for the box of tissues on the coffee table and handed it to her. "If you're not in a hurry to leave, I can give you the short version of what's happened since then," I said softly. She dabbed at her cheeks and tried to regain her composure. "Sophie met a great guy, Stan Evans. He's into computers and networks, and they just click. She's an amazing mom, and they're completely devoted to each other. Helen and I didn't last long. She's too young for me, and she just needed someone to help her get back on her feet. She found someone else, moved on, and that was that. I date here and there, but I walk away if it starts to get too serious. I'm better off on my own. I'm sticking with being single." A quiet stillness settled over the room. "I want to share some things with you, mainly for my own peace of mind, but maybe there's something in there you can learn from, too. I hope so. For a long time, I couldn't wait for you to be locked up. I hated you. I wished you were gone. And when they put you away, I thought I'd finally feel relief. But the moment they closed the door on you, something in me changed. I couldn't enjoy my victory anymore. So, I let go of my hatred even though you never asked for it. I forgave you because I know you weren't entirely to blame. I couldn't understand you until it was too late, and by then we had stopped talking. We were just fighting all the time." Emily wiped her eyes and slowly lifted her gaze from the floor. Her expression was lost, but she didn't say anything. That's the truth, simple and clear. If you have nothing else to say, and if you're not hungry, I won't keep you. You probably have other things you need to do. She stood up and took the box. As she headed toward the door, I called out to her for the first time in years. Emily, it doesn't matter anymore, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but I'm curious. Back when we were together, especially that last day, it was clear you saw me as weak. Do you still think I'm a pushover, Emily? She stopped with her hand on the doorknob and glanced back at me. Her bitterness was palpable as she spat out her words, telling me she hated me and that I had been cruel, ruining her life in the process. After a brief pause, she added that no, she didn't consider me a pushover. With that, she walked out of my life for good.